heartless millionaire left his pregnant wife in a fire for his mistress, she returned for revenge. He had the world in his grasp, handsome, rich, and esteemed by New York's elite. Yet, beneath the polished exterior, a selfish heart beat. In a devastating turn of events, his pregnant wife found herself trapped in a raging fire that ripped through their estate. Standing amidst the chaos, he made a choice that would define him forever. He pulled his seductive mistress to safety and left his terrified wife behind. Everyone believed she perished in the flames until she returned, haunted by betrayal and determined to make him pay. From glitzy penthouses to hidden plots of retribution, this is their explosive story. Lance Westbrook was not born into wealth. His childhood home in upstate New York had peeling paint and cold floors in winter. His father worked at a local garage, grease under his nails, while his mother juggled shifts at a diner. From an early age, Lance vowed he would never be poor again. He showed a precocious talent for numbers, devouring every library book on business he could find. By 17, he'd launched a small but profitable online retail site, flipping discounted electronics. Admitted to Wharton on a scholarship, he immersed himself in networking. Charisma radiated off him. Professors praised his sharp intellect, and fellow students saw him as a rising star. Upon graduation, he joined Morgan Stanley in Manhattan, quickly making his mark. His gift for reading market trends turned heads at the firm. By his late 20s, he'd moved on from the corporate world to start his own private equity enterprise. Profits soared to dizzying heights. During those early years in the city, Lance met Naomi Ellis, an architectural student at Columbia. She stood out from the socialites he usually encountered. Warm and grounded, Naomi listened intently to his big plans, but never seemed mesmerized by his shiny successes. Lance was intrigued by her steady moral compass and honest laughter. She, in turn, was captivated by his ambition, not because of the money, but because of the spark in his eyes when he described how he wanted to reshape entire industries. They dated for 2 whirlwind years, capturing youthful dreams in late-night walks through Riverside Park. Lance valued Naomi's vision of building livable, sustainable structures for everyday people. She liked that he believed in bold transformations. Despite occasional red flags like Lance's single-minded pursuit of profit, they built a life together, culminating in a lavish wedding on a rooftop overlooking Central Park. City tabloids celebrated them as a power couple, but close friends knew Naomi was the moral anchor in an increasingly cutthroat environment. Months into their marriage, Lance's unstoppable ambition only grew. He diversified his holdings, acquiring real estate in Manhattan, investing in tech startups, and forging partnerships with foreign investors. Their wealth ballooned. They moved into a sprawling penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city skyline. Life seemed perfect on the surface, but behind the facade, subtle cracks formed. Late nights at the office, hush-hush meetings, and a creeping arrogance in Lance's demeanor began to overshadow the love story that had brought them together. Naomi often felt she was speaking to a stranger, one who was so obsessed with material achievements that he barely recognized right from wrong. Neither realized how these cracks would soon open into a canyon of betrayal that no amount of money could fill. Lance's private equity firm, Westbrook Capital, soared in reputation. He graced the pages of the New York Times financial section, heralded as the new face of aggressive buyouts and corporate restructuring. CEOs courted his favor, desperate for capital injections that could rescue or overhaul their companies. Lance reveled in the influence he wielded with a single signature on a dotted line. Deals worth hundreds of millions hinged on his whim. More money, more power, more prestige. He was unstoppable. But as his professional profile rose, so did an insidious sense of entitlement. He demanded immediate results from employees, launched businesses in industries he knew little about, and juggled them with reckless ambition. Meetings turned into screaming matches if targets weren't met. Mistakes, no matter how small, were met with icy retribution. When Naomi gently advised caution, worried about the moral implications of his deals, Lance brushed her off. He dismissed her concerns as naive, telling her that real money wasn't made by playing it safe or being sentimental. Disheartened, Naomi attempted to focus on her architectural projects. She had begun freelancing with a sustainability firm, designing low-income housing developments intended to uplift poorer neighborhoods. Her vision was philanthropic, merging practicality with dignity. Yet whenever she shared a triumph, Lance's attention flickered, as if philanthropic endeavors were a silly hobby in comparison to his billionaire pursuits. He'd congratulate her with hollow words, then pivot back to the stock markets, impatient with anything that wasn't about accelerating returns on investment. The rift between them deepened further when Naomi started noticing questionable tactics at Westbrook Capital. Rumors whispered of insider deals, shell companies, and regulatory lines that Lance and his top associates danced around. She confronted him one evening, voice trembling. He laughed it off, calling it rumor mongering from jealous rivals. But a shadowy look crossed his face, hinting at how far he was willing to go to protect his empire. Then came the first real betrayal. Naomi discovered texts on Lance's phone from a woman named Serafina Rourke. The messages hinted at more than just business, subtle flirtations after work plans. Confronting him, Naomi was met with a wave of denial, swiftly followed by anger for prying. Lance claimed Serafina was a prominent investor's daughter, that the banter was harmless. Naomi wanted to believe him, to trust the man she once adored, yet the emotional distance was undeniable. In bed, Lance either fell asleep mid-conversation or scrolled through his phone until the early hours. Business trips got extended. Intimacy vanished, replaced by a cold, restless tension. Though Naomi prayed it was just a rough patch, a sense of dread pooled in her stomach. If Lance could act so blaze about moral boundaries in business, what lines would he cross in his personal life? She tried ignoring her suspicions, burying herself in architectural plans and hoping love would bridge the gap. She had no way to foresee that a shocking twist one, involving life, death, and unimaginable betrayal lurked on the horizon, ready to strike. As the distance between Lance and Naomi widened, an unexpected development threw their lives into chaos. Naomi discovered she was pregnant. The symptoms started subtly fatigue and a hint of morning nausea. At first, she chalked it up to stress, but a home test confirmed the truth. She was going to have a baby. Despite her reservations about Lance's shifting morals, Naomi felt a surge of hope. Perhaps this child would rekindle the love they once shared and draw them back together. Late one evening, she planned a special dinner in the penthouse, cooking his favorite meal. She lit candles, set the table with fine china, and nervously awaited Lance's arrival. He walked in an hour late, jacket slung over one arm, tie askew. Without pausing to greet her, he mumbled about a failed negotiation, cursing incompetent brokers. Naomi gently led him to the table, trying to calm his simmering rage. Her voice trembled with nervous excitement as she announced, "Lance, we're having a baby." For a moment, he seemed too stunned to speak. Then his expression hardened. Instead of joy, Naomi saw alarm, even frustration. He asked how far along she was, then launched into a flurry of questions about how this would affect their routines. His words cut like ice. "Do you really think this is the best time? With the deals I have coming up, do you think I can handle a newborn right now?" Naomi's heart sank. She had prepared for many possible reactions, tears of joy, perhaps even relief, but not this cold assessment of how a child might inconvenience him. She argued that love didn't have a schedule, that parenthood was a blessing, but Lance barely met her eyes. In the days that followed, he feigned a mechanical sort of support, scheduling doctor's appointments, transferring money into Naomi's account to cover costs. But the intangible warmth of an expectant father was missing. He started sleeping in his home office, claiming stress kept him awake. Once, Naomi overheard him whispering to Serafina Rourke on the phone about business expansions. Though the conversation had a flirtatious undertone, she felt sick to her stomach, wishing the pregnancy would unite them, yet seeing him slip further away. Still, she pressed on. She read baby books, bought prenatal vitamins, tried to cultivate positivity for the little life growing inside her. Each time she pictured a tiny heartbeat in her womb, she clung to hope. But as Lance's resentment and restlessness grew, a storm of betrayal brewed in the background, culminating in the single act that would shatter all illusions of trust, the fateful night of the fire. Rumors about Lance's affair with Serafina Rourke spread quietly among the wealthy circles he frequented. She was the daughter of Charles Rourke, a veteran investor with ties to old money in Europe. Serafina was known for her striking looks and ruthless charm. She moved through banquets and fundraisers like a swan, leaving male admirers starstruck in her wake. Lance, riding the high of his financial success, found himself gravitating toward her powerful family's network. At first, their relationship masqueraded as business. Serafina pitched a collaborative fund, hoping to merge Westbrook Capital with her father's international assets. Lance welcomed the idea, aware that forging alliances with the Rourkes would catapult his status. Lavish dinners morphed into late-night strategy sessions. Naomi, pregnant and often alone, suspected something deeper was at play but lacked proof. Then, Lance made a grave mistake. One evening, absent-mindedly, he left his phone on the coffee table. A message from Serafina popped onto the screen. "Can't wait to see you again tonight. Miss your touch." Naomi, walking by, glimpsed the text. Her stomach churned. Confronting Lance unleashed a torrent of denial. He claimed it was harmless flirting, a cultural difference, anything to placate her. But Naomi saw the guilt etched in his eyes. Over time, Lance stopped pretending. When Naomi asked if he was actually in love with Serafina, Lance simply said he respected her and enjoyed her intelligence. The semantics only confirmed Naomi's worst fears. Naomi tried to reason with him, reminding him of her pregnancy, pleading for the sake of their unborn child, but Lance remained resolute that business came first and emotional entanglements were unavoidable. In his twisted logic, the potential gains from bonding with the Rourkes justified crossing any moral lines. Serafina, too, was hardly innocent. She relished the power she held over Lance. Naomi became a mere obstacle. She dropped sarcastic remarks at high society events, flaunting her closeness to Lance whenever possible. At times, she'd parade her father's endorsement of Lance's deals as if they were stepping stones to an unspoken engagement. The tabloids, always sniffing for scandal, started hinting at a major shift in Lance Westbrook's personal life. Naomi, feeling battered by heartbreak, retreated into her own sorrow. She busied herself with her architectural drawings, enduring sleepless nights filled with dread about the future. How could a man she once admired, a man she believed was good at heart, become so callous? Each day she awoke, hoping for a miracle, that Lance would come to his senses. But the path he was on led toward one unimaginable act of betrayal. The night the flames rose high, and a single decision spelled out who truly mattered to him and who did not. It happened during a business retreat at the Westbrook countryside estate, an opulent manor perched on a lush estate near the Hudson River. Lance often hosted potential investors there, bringing them away from the city's distractions to finalize lucrative deals. This time, Serafina and her father attended, along with a handful of foreign financiers. Naomi, heavily pregnant by now, was merely a decorative presence at the event. She felt uncomfortable, overshadowed by Serafina's confidence and her father's smooth negotiations with Lance. The evening started with a grand dinner in the manor's dining hall. Crystal chandeliers bathed the table in warm light. Bottles of vintage champagne circulated. Lance was in his element, charming the financiers with tales of expansions, profits, and synergy. Naomi tried to remain composed, forcing smiles and polite conversation despite her inner turmoil. Serafina laughed a little too freely at Lance's jokes, leaning close to him whenever she spoke. After dinner, the group migrated to the manor's large drawing room, complete with a roaring fireplace. Naomi, feeling tired, excused herself to rest upstairs. She felt nauseous, her back ached, and the tension was becoming suffocating. Lance barely noticed her exit, absorbed in a debate about global markets. Serafina's laughter trailed behind Naomi like a mocking echo. Around midnight, as the investors retired to their guest suites, Lance and Serafina lingered near the fireplace. Embers glowed in the hearth, reflecting in her eyes as she whispered sweet promises. Lance, emboldened by wine and self-importance, responded with hushed words of desire. Though the manor was old, with creaking wooden beams, the thought of potential hazards barely registered to anyone. Replacing old wiring or upgrading safety measures was low on Lance's priority list. No one noticed the spark in the fireplace jump onto the threadbare rug, a tiny ember lost in the glow of the night. Within minutes, the old cloth began to smolder. Curtains caught next, dancing with orange tongues of flame. By the time the smoke reached the upper floors, a small inferno had begun to spread, fueled by the manor's aged wooden structure. Naomi woke to the smell of burning. Panic seized her as she realized the corridors were filling with smoke. Disoriented, she rushed to find Lance, calling his name. Flames licked the walls, thick smoke stinging her eyes. She coughed, heart pounding. Her unborn child kicked frantically within her, as if sensing danger. In the chaos, she heard distant shouts. 1,000 thoughts raced through her mind. How to escape, whether everyone was safe, and where, oh where, was Lance? As the fire grew, the manor's alarms belatedly began to shriek. Confused guests scrambled from their rooms, coughing and stumbling through thick smoke. Downstairs, Lance and Serafina were among the first to notice the flames racing across the rug toward the furniture. A primal fear overtook them. They rushed toward the main exit, ignoring the panicked cries of the staff and investors still fumbling about. Naomi, on the second floor, tried to make her way downstairs. She shielded her nose and mouth with a sleeve, every breath a choking ordeal. Smoke enveloped the corridors, rendering her nearly blind. Her pregnant belly made moving swiftly difficult. She prayed that Lance would come for her, that despite their marital rift, he wouldn't leave her or the child they had created. Finally, she reached the grand staircase, only to see a roaring wall of fire blocking her path. The heat was unbearable, forcing her back. She heard faint voices from below, Lance's voice among them. Summoning what little strength she had, Naomi shouted his name, coughing violently. But the flames crackled louder, drowning her out. Outside, Lance and Serafina burst through the main door with a small cluster of terrified guests. Fresh air filled their lungs, a stark contrast to the suffocating haze inside. Staff scrambled to call 911, and someone shouted for everyone to stand back as the flames devoured the manor's old timbers. Lance, eyes wild, scanned the gathering crowd, foreign financiers, staff members. Serafina clinging to him in panic. He realized Naomi was missing, and the weight of that realization flickered across his face. For a heartbeat, he seemed conflicted. But then Serafina grabbed his arm, tears streaking her cheeks, begging him not to go back inside. She cried that it was too dangerous, that the house was moments from collapse. A rush of selfish fear overcame him, fear of dying, fear of losing everything. He let out a strangled breath, turned away from the burning doorway, and allowed Serafina to drag him further from the inferno. Naomi's name died on his lips. Inside, Naomi clung to the banister, feeling the heat sear her skin. She thought of her unborn child. Desperate, she tried to find another exit. By a stroke of fortune, she remembered the estate's back staircase leading to the kitchen. Crouching low, she navigated the smoke-filled corridor. The journey was excruciating, flames licking at her heels, beams collapsing around her. But maternal instinct drove her on. She stumbled through the kitchen door, bursting into the cool night air just as a section of the roof caved in. When the fire trucks finally arrived, they found Naomi unconscious near the estate's back lawn, her body scorched, clothes singed, yet miraculously alive. Lance, preoccupied with Serafina's safety and the potential liability claims, never realized that at that exact moment, the paramedics were rushing Naomi and their unborn child to Mount Sinai Hospital, clinging to the narrowest thread of life. By the time dawn broke, the once majestic countryside manor had been reduced to smoking ruins. Lance lingered at the edge of the property, arms wrapped around Serafina as firefighters doused the last embers. He offered statements to the local news, spinning it as a tragic accident, old wiring, a forgotten spark. Worried about the blow to his image, he made sure to hint at large donations to the local fire department for new equipment. Even now, in the aftermath of horror, he thought first of damage control. He believed Naomi was lost in the blaze. A strange numbness enveloped him, part shock, part relief. But he also felt a gnawing guilt that he brushed aside. He convinced himself that no one could have survived that inferno. Reporting Naomi's death would be easier than explaining how he'd failed to save her. He knew the press would eventually descend on this story, and he planned to spin it in a way that painted him as a grieving husband. Meanwhile, Naomi lay in critical condition at Mount Sinai Hospital's burn unit. The paramedics had found her barely breathing. She had second- and third-degree burns along her arms and torso. Smoke inhalation scarred her lungs. Doctors scrambled to stabilize her vital signs, administering oxygen and the fourth fluids. The risk of infection was high. Most pressing of all was the welfare of her unborn baby. The medical team held an emergency consultation. The trauma was severe, and the baby's life hung in the balance. Naomi drifted in and out of consciousness, oblivious to the chaos around her. In moments of lucidity, she whispered Lance's name, then coughed violently as the ventilator hissed. Nightmares plagued her, visions of fire, of Lance turning his back on her, of Serafina's triumphant smirk. She felt her unborn child's faint movements, like a plea to keep fighting. A day later, the doctors faced a critical juncture. They performed an emergency procedure to save the baby, a tiny girl who arrived prematurely but clung stubbornly to life. Naomi's condition remained touch and go, an infection threatening to wreak havoc. Yet her body, fueled by maternal love, fought against the odds. Word of Naomi's miraculous survival did not reach Lance. She was listed under a Jane Doe in the hospital records, standard procedure for unidentified trauma victims with no ID on them. The hospital staff had no way of contacting next of kin. Meanwhile, Lance and Serafina left the charred ruins behind, returning to Manhattan. The tragedy that should have broken Lance's conscience instead pushed him further into a twisted rationalization. If Naomi was gone, he could continue with Serafina, free of any guilt or obligations. But life had other plans. Naomi's survival would soon be the catalyst for a reckoning more terrifying than any blaze. 2 weeks after the fire, Naomi regained consciousness. A dull ache coursed through her body, punctuated by stinging pain whenever she moved. Bandages swathed much of her skin, hiding the raw, burned flesh beneath. Machines beeped steadily, tracking her vital signs. Slowly, she pieced together flashes of memory, the smoke, the flames, Lance's absence in her darkest hour. She panicked, recalling her pregnancy. Almost in response, a soft cry echoed from a nearby bassinet, her newborn daughter. Nurses stepped in, calming Naomi's frantic questions. Against the odds, her baby had survived. Weak and premature, yes, but very much alive. Naomi wept, arms trembling as she cradled the tiny infant. The child's skin was delicate, eyes fluttering with life Naomi had feared was lost. When hospital administrators tried to confirm Naomi's identity, she struggled to speak. Her throat felt raw from inhalation injuries. She managed to whisper her name, Naomi Westbrook, but the surname triggered no response from the staff. Officially, she was still recorded as Jane Doe. She had no phone or ID, everything had been destroyed. The local police had not linked her to the manor fire, as Lance had provided them with incomplete information. He mentioned Naomi's supposed tragic death, but no body had been recovered. Naomi realized with horror that Lance believed she was dead and that he might be relieved about it. Summoning what little energy she had, she begged the hospital staff for a phone. Her immediate thought was to call her parents, who lived several states away. But they had never approved of her marriage to Lance, and she'd lost touch over the years. She dialed old numbers, only to reach disconnected lines or strangers. Meanwhile, she discovered from a newspaper clipping a nurse provided that Lance was continuing his business as usual, with Serafina by his side at corporate galas. The obituary for Naomi Westbrook was suspiciously absent. Perhaps Lance found it more convenient to let the rumor of her death float quietly, overshadowed by the tragic accident. Naomi seethed with a fury stronger than any physical pain. She saw her disfigured reflection in a small handheld mirror, a face she barely recognized. Yet the baby's presence reminded her she had a reason to fight. If Lance had left her for dead, she would make sure he faced the consequences. The seeds of revenge took root in her wounded heart, nourished by betrayal and heartbreak. She refused to let the hospital discharge her under her real name, fearful that Lance might discover her survival prematurely and snatch away her child. She concocted a plan to rebuild her strength, find trusted allies, and strike at Lance when he least expected. The flames that nearly ended her life now fueled a passion for justice that burned brighter than any inferno. Naomi spent 3 long months in Mount Sinai Hospital's burn unit. She battled infection after infection, endured multiple surgeries, and underwent agonizing physical therapy to regain mobility in her arms. Each day, she demanded to see her child. Stroking the baby's tiny fingers, she drew courage from that fragile life. The staff, moved by her resilience, gave her the best care possible. Funds were an issue, but an anonymous donor, a retired nurse who'd been touched by Naomi's plight, stepped in to cover critical expenses. Naomi resolved to repay that kindness one day. During these painful weeks, Naomi discovered a quiet ally in a young nurse named Dara Lynn. Empathetic and discreet, Dara helped Naomi piece together news from the outside world. She printed articles about Lance and Serafina attending philanthropic events, read business magazines detailing Westbrook Capital's expansions. Each snippet of information slashed at Naomi's heart. Lance acted every bit the wealthy bachelor, forging deeper ties with the Rourkes. Apparently unaffected by the tragedy, bitter determination coalesced in Naomi's mind. Once she was strong enough, she'd leave the hospital quietly, She and her daughter, whom she'd named Luna, would vanish, giving Naomi time to strategize. She refused to let Lance suspect her survival until she had the power to confront him on her own terms. If she revealed herself too soon, he might use his considerable influence to undermine her credibility or take Luna away. Step by step, Naomi learned how to walk again without excruciating pain. Physical therapy sessions, combined with her innate grit, gradually restored her strength. She also consulted a trauma counselor who urged her to confront the emotional toll. At times, Naomi felt consumed by rage, haunted by the image of Lance fleeing the fire with Serafina, leaving her to die. But Luna's needs kept her anchored. She would not let hatred erode her ability to be a loving mother. When the day of discharge arrived, Naomi left under a pseudonym, with official records listing her as an out-of-state burn victim. Dara helped arrange a small, modest apartment in a quieter part of the city, courtesy of a local charity that placed trauma survivors in transitional housing. Naomi used the last of her savings to secure the spot, forging an agreement to pay rent once she could work again. Alone in that humble apartment, with baby Luna gurgling softly, Naomi felt a surge of determination. Lance Westbrook might be the darling of Wall Street, but he was also a soulless coward who left his pregnant wife to burn. She vowed she'd gather evidence of his crimes, financial, moral, and beyond. She would rip away his false halo in the public eye. Then, when he finally saw her face again, scarred yet unbroken, she'd unleash a reckoning more brutal than any flames that once consumed her. Life in her modest, new apartment was a far cry from the penthouse Naomi once called home. Medical bills still loomed, and caring for Luna demanded constant energy. But every time she felt overwhelmed, she reminded herself of her mission: to expose Lance Westbrook for who he truly was and ensure he could never hurt anyone again. Her first step was building a support network. She reached out to Dara Lynn for medical advice and emotional backup. Through Dara, she also connected with a local women's shelter that specialized in helping survivors of domestic and emotional abuse. Although Lance had never physically harmed Naomi before the fire, the betrayal amounted to a profound violation. The shelter offered legal resources and introduced Naomi to a pro bono investigator named Colin Chase, a retired detective with a passion for justice. Colin listened carefully to Naomi's story, eyes darkening at the mention of Lance's callousness. He agreed to help her dig into Westbrook Capital's dealings, suspecting there might be skeletons in Lance's corporate closet. Together, they formed a clandestine plan: gather evidence of any illegal or unethical practices, quietly verify Naomi's account of the fire, and compile enough proof to blow Lance's carefully constructed image to smithereens. Naomi learned from Colin that Westbrook Capital was rumored to be engaged in shady deals overseas, allegations of bribery, shady shell companies, and even sabotage of competitor projects. Colin had contacts in the finance world who owed him favors. He believed if they could link Lance's personal actions to these fraudulent schemes, the authorities would pounce. Naomi, for her part, had unique knowledge of Lance's routine, confidants, and thought processes. She recalled half-overheard phone calls, suspicious wire transfers, and personal diaries. Lance sometimes scribbled in after a big victory. Still, evidence alone wasn't enough. Naomi wanted to confront Lance face to face, to see the look in his eyes when he realized she was alive. But the wise counsel from Colin and Dara urged patience. It was dangerous to tip Lance off. He was wealthy, powerful, and unscrupulous, capable of paying off law enforcement or burying lawsuits under an army of lawyers. Another risk: he might come after Naomi or, worse, try to claim Luna if he knew the baby existed. So Naomi began her days caring for her infant daughter, while nights were spent poring over old documents, searching for any lead that might implicate Lance. Each phone call with Colin yielded fresh possibilities. Meanwhile, rumors swirled in society columns that Lance and Serafina were planning a grand engagement. The tabloids dubbed them the golden couple, the wealthy financier and his brilliant partner from an old money family. Naomi could practically taste her anger every time she saw a headline about them. The world might see a fairy tale, but she knew it was a castle built on ashes, and she was about to bring it crashing down. Weeks stretched into months. Naomi's face had mostly healed, though scars remained on her arms and shoulders. Her hair, once long and lustrous, was cropped short to manage the areas singed by the flames. Still, her gaze gleamed with a steely resolve. She took cautious steps outside her apartment, wearing hats and scarves to avoid being recognized. She was determined to keep her existence a secret until the moment was ripe. In this period of strategic planning, a surprise visitor arrived, Danielle Fisher, a disgruntled former executive assistant at Westbrook Capital. Colin had discovered her name in a list of ex-employees who left under mysterious circumstances. When Danielle heard about Naomi's quest for justice, she reached out covertly, claiming she had crucial information. They met at a quiet cafe in a less fashionable part of the city, well away from Lance's typical haunts. Danielle appeared nervous, glancing over her shoulder as she spoke. She revealed that, over her 3-year tenure, she'd witnessed hush-hush transactions and overheard phone calls that indicated money laundering, insider trading, and bribes to foreign officials. She had copies of emails, bank statements, digital footprints that could tie Lance directly to criminal activity. The catch? She needed protection. Lance's lawyers had threatened her when she attempted to negotiate a severance package, accusing her of breach of contract if she leaked any corporate secrets. Naomi assured Danielle she wasn't alone in this fight. Colin arrived soon after, exchanging details and verifying Danielle's claims. Danielle's trove of evidence was a game-changer. If properly presented to law enforcement and the media, it could trigger a full-scale investigation, possibly toppling Westbrook Capital. Naomi's heart pounded at the possibility, forcing Lance to face public disgrace and legal consequences. It was more than she dared hope for. But Danielle also brought news that chilled Naomi's blood. Westbrook Capital had been quietly searching for Naomi's remains. The official story was that no body was found after the fire, and Lance spun it as an unspeakable tragedy, perhaps. Wild animals had dragged her away, or the flames had been too intense to leave remains. The firm hired private detectives to close the case, ensuring no questions remained that might tarnish Lance's narrative. If these investigators discovered Naomi was alive, they might take drastic steps to silence her. Naomi clenched her jaw, grateful for Danielle's warning. A new sense of urgency pulsed through her. Time was running out. She needed to finalize her plan to strike at Lance before he discovered her survival. It was a high-stakes game of cat and mouse, with powerful players on both sides. But with Luna's presence in her life, Naomi refused to let fear overrule her quest. She'd face the danger head-on. After all, she'd already walked through fire. Facing a corrupt millionaire who once loved her was only the next challenge in a life reshaped by betrayal. The walls around Lance Westbrook began to tighten, though he remained blissfully unaware. Behind the scenes, Naomi, Colin, and Danielle meticulously organized the trove of evidence, digital proof of Lance's illegal dealings, witness statements from ex-employees, and details about the hush money paid to regulatory officials. They also mapped out a timeline of Lance's actions leading up to the catastrophic fire. Each puzzle piece fit together, forming a damning picture of a man who put profit and personal gain above human life. Meanwhile, rumors about Lance and Serafina's engagement grew stronger. Invitations for an extravagant celebration circulated among Manhattan's elite. Lance had rented the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel for the announcement, aiming to impress the Rourke family's European connections. The event was set to be a spectacle, a list celebrities, influential politicians, and foreign dignitaries on the guest list. In an ironic twist, it was scheduled for the exact date that would have marked Lance and Naomi's third wedding anniversary. Naomi felt a deep pang when she learned of the event. The memory of her own wedding day stung like a fresh wound. She wondered how Lance could so casually discard everything they'd shared. But fury quickly overshadowed her hurt. She resolved to make the Plaza Gala the scene of Lance's undoing. If he wanted to flaunt his new life, she would ensure his old sins were laid bare before all the cameras and the city's most influential figures. To execute this, Naomi needed one last piece, a personal confrontation. She wanted to see if Lance harbored any regret or remorse. She arranged a clandestine meeting under an alias posing as a potential investor from a Middle Eastern royal family. With Danielle's help, she secured a short appointment at Westbrook Capital's skyscraper. The plan was to gauge his readiness, or to confirm if he truly cared nothing for the life he took from her. Colin argued that revealing herself prematurely was dangerous, but Naomi insisted on witnessing Lance's arrogance firsthand. She'd take precautions, a disguised appearance, a voice modulator if necessary. Each passing hour, Naomi's adrenaline spiked. She carefully rehearsed how to handle the confrontation, reminding herself that her prime directive was to collect final proof. But an undercurrent of raw emotion coursed through her. She wanted to stand before Lance as the living testament he'd tried to snuff out. She wanted to watch his face when the realization struck that she had survived, that their unborn child had survived, and that the revenge she'd nurtured was about to scorch his life. Outside, Manhattan's busy streets glistened, unaware of the cataclysm that would soon unfold within its gilded halls. The countdown to the Plaza event marched on. Naomi inhaled, gathering her courage. Lance Westbrook would learn that some fires can't be extinguished, and the flames of betrayal always burn back. The day Naomi marched into Westbrook Capital felt surreal, dressed in a sleek, conservative suit and wearing tinted glasses to mask her eyes. She arrived at the gleaming skyscraper that soared above Midtown. Danielle had arranged an appointment under the pseudonym Amira Khalid, an interested Middle Eastern investor. Colin stood a few blocks away with a small team, ready to intervene if anything went awry. Naomi's heart hammered in her chest as she passed security, forging a calm exterior that belied her turbulent emotions. On the executive floor, a polished receptionist led Naomi to Lance's corner office, a panoramic view of the city offered behind towering glass windows. The air smelled of expensive cologne and freshly printed contracts. Naomi braced herself, the burn scars on her arms tingling beneath her blouse. Then she saw him. Lance stood by his desk, phone in hand, discussing some urgent deal. Despite the passage of time, he looked almost unchanged, confident posture, slicked back hair, a tailored suit that screamed affluence. His voice carried that same arrogance she remembered too well. When he turned around and glanced at Naomi, he offered a dismissive smile, barely looking up from his phone. "Miss Khalid?" "Pleasure," he said briskly, motioning for her to sit. "Let's be quick. I have a flight to catch for a major investor meeting in London tomorrow." Naomi's pulse pounded. She slid into the chair across from him, scanning his face for any glimmer of guilt or recognition. He remained oblivious. As he began rattling off Westbrook Capital's portfolio highlights, she felt a wave of repulsion. This was the man who left her in a burning building. Yet here he was, boasting about his transparent and forward-thinking approach to global investments. Clenching her teeth, Naomi let him spin his sales pitch. Eventually, she placed a folder on the desk, a printout of damning financial records Danielle had provided. "I've done my research, Mr. Westbrook," she said, modulating her voice to be unrecognizably low. "And I find certain transactions concerning." Lance frowned, flipping through the sheets. Naomi watched his expression shift from confusion to alarm. He tried to mask it with a confident sneer. "I'm not sure where you got these documents, Miss Khalid, but they're out of context." A surge of satisfaction lanced through Naomi. She allowed her glasses to slip slightly, revealing a glimpse of her eyes. "Tell me, Lance," she said quietly, dropping the fake accent. "Do you remember the fire at your countryside manor? The one where your pregnant wife supposedly died?" He froze, color draining from his face. For an agonizing heartbeat, confusion warred with terror. Recognition flickered. Naomi removed her glasses fully, letting him see the faint scar tracing her temple. His breath caught. "Na, Naomi?" he stammered, voice cracking. She savored the panic that contorted his features. Trembling with rage, she leaned forward, voice tight. "I survived. And so did our child. Your entire world is about to implode. Enjoy your final moments of power, Lance, because they're almost over." For days after the confrontation, Lance lived in dread. He cancelled his London trip, frantically meeting with lawyers and private investigators to contain any fallout. He tried to track Naomi down, suspecting she'd gone underground. But his resources came up short. She was elusive, guarded by Colin's network. All he could do was press forward with his glamorous engagement gala at the Plaza Hotel, hoping to salvage his image. Serafina and her father insisted the show must go on, a demonstration of resilience and wealth in the face of rumor. Lance, sleepless and paranoid, reluctantly agreed. The night of the gala, the plaza's grand ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers and elegantly set tables. 6 arrived in designer gowns and black tie suits, greeted by paparazzi thronging the hotel entrance. Lance moved through the crowd mechanically, forced smiles plastered on his face. Serafina clung to his arm, oblivious to the personal crisis roiling beneath his polished veneer. He noticed a heavier security presence, presumably hired by Serafina's father to ensure no unpleasant surprises marred their big announcement. But Naomi was already inside, hidden among the staff. Colin had secured a catering uniform for her, complete with a cap that concealed her hair and partially shadowed her face. Danielle mingled nearby with a forged press pass, a camera around her neck. It was a well-orchestrated infiltration, timed down to the minute. Naomi's heart hammered as she carried champagne flutes across the parquet floor. She spotted Lance and Serafina greeting guests at the dais. The sight of them stung like a fresh wound, but her fury gave her focus. As dinner concluded, a hush fell. Serafina's father took the microphone, welcoming everyone. He launched into a glowing endorsement of Lance, praising his brilliance and philanthropic spirit. Then Lance stepped up, forced to deliver a speech about love, partnership, and the future. The hypocrisy made Naomi's blood boil. At that moment, Colin signaled from the back of the room. Danielle poised her camera, and Naomi steeled herself. She walked to the center of the ballroom, ignoring staff who told her to wait outside. She approached a large projection screen that had been set up for a celebratory slideshow. Before security could intercept, Danielle cued a hidden laptop feed. The screen flickered images of incriminating emails, fraudulent bank statements, and a flurry of official documents exposing Westbrook Capital's crimes. The crowd gasped. Lance spun around, eyes bulging in horror. He tried to wave security over, but Naomi stepped forward, removing her cap, letting the overhead lights reveal her scarred face. Gasps rippled through the room. Some recognized her from society pages as Lance's long-lost wife. "Allow me to introduce myself," Naomi said, voice clear despite her racing heartbeat. "I am Naomi Westbrook, left for dead by this man. and I have evidence he's committed fraud, bribery, and more. The man you celebrate tonight is a monster." Pandemonium erupted. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted, Serafina recoiled, shock etched across her face. Lance staggered, swallowing convulsively, as if the oxygen had been sucked from the room. Naomi felt a fierce triumph. Her final blow was imminent, and nothing, no amount of money or power could douse the flames of justice she had ignited. The ballroom descended into chaos. Security guards surged forward, but the media pounced too, capturing every angle of the scandal unfolding. Flashes lit up Naomi's determined face and Lance's shell-shocked expression. Guests scrambled to distance themselves from the disgraced millionaire. Serafina's father stood rooted in disbelief, cursing under his breath as he realized the magnitude of Lance's downfall. Naomi pivoted to face the cameras, brandishing copies of the documents that Danielle had helped compile. "This is the man you revered," she stated, voice steely. "He left me, his pregnant wife, in a burning building. He's defrauded investors, bribed officials, and stolen from honest people." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the silent crowd. "I survived barely. Our daughter survived too, thanks to the mercy of strangers. Now, let the world know who Lance Westbrook truly is." Police officers arrived, tipped off by Colin's team about potential criminal evidence. Colin himself stood in the background, arms folded, handing over a neatly labeled dossier to the lead detective. Officers approached Lance, who was too stunned to resist, as they led him aside for questioning. His face was ashen, words failing him. He glanced at Naomi one final time, eyes brimming with a mixture of panic and a glimmer of regret. From the corner of her eye, Naomi noticed Serafina trembling, tears streaking her mascara. Serafina stared at Naomi, fear mingling with an odd respect. But Naomi had no time for pity. Her vengeance was complete. She watched as Lance tried to stammer denials, but the weight of evidence smothered any chance of escape. The press devoured every detail, broadcasting the fall of a financial titan who, until this very moment, appeared untouchable. In the aftermath, authorities froze Westbrook Capital's assets, pending a full investigation. Lawsuits from shareholders multiplied. Lance faced charges ranging from fraud to endangering human life. His carefully curated empire began to collapse overnight, major clients fleeing in droves. Serafina and her father, desperate to protect their own name, distanced themselves from Lance. Their alliance, once seen as unstoppable, fractured under the scorching glare of truth. Naomi, although battered by her own ordeal, felt a powerful release. The vengeance she'd nurtured had found its perfect stage. Still, a quiet sadness lingered. She never wanted to become a person who thrived on destruction, but Lance's betrayal demanded a reckoning. Now she could finally move forward, her child safe, her conscience free of the lie that was once her marriage. In the days that followed, Naomi returned to her modest apartment. Luna lay in a cradle by the window, sunlight dancing across her innocent face. The infant cooed as Naomi leaned over, placing a gentle kiss on her forehead. She knew challenges remained: financial stability, physical and emotional healing from the trauma. But she also knew her strength, tempered by the fire that tried to consume her. Gazing at the city skyline beyond, Naomi resolved to rebuild her life from the ashes. She wasn't the naive architect student who fell for a heartless millionaire's charm. She was a survivor, a mother, and a woman who'd proven that karma might be slow, but it is always certain. And in that knowledge, she found peace. Fate has a way of leveling even the tallest towers built on lies. Lance Westbrook learned that wealth and power cannot shield one from the consequences of a callous heart. In the end, his empire collapsed under the weight of its own deceit, leaving him exposed and alone. Naomi, once a loving wife, channeled her suffering into the flames of determination. emerging stronger as both a mother and a survivor. Her courage became a beacon, proving that truth and resilience can triumph over betrayal. If the intensity of this story kept you on the edge of your seat or reminded you that justice, though slow, is inevitable, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Every bit of your support allows us to bring you more dramatic, thought-provoking tales. Stay with us for the next story that dives into the depths of ambition, love, and the unbreakable human spirit.
A sleek obsidian black Aston Martin, DB11, tore through the city streets, its engine a low growl of pure power. Behind the wheel, Christopher Davies, a man whose net worth was discussed in financial journals, glanced at the passenger seat. There, Brooke Summers, stunning and artfully distressed, clutched her stomach. This was an emergency, a detour from his carefully planned life. His phone buzzed on the console, flashing a picture of his pregnant wife, Jessica. He ignored it. He was busy being the hero for the woman beside him. He pulled into the exclusive private entrance of the city's most prestigious medical facility, a place built for the elite. He was about to demand the best for the best. He had no idea he was a guest in a kingdom he never knew existed, walking into a judgment he could never have foreseen. The Hartman Medical Center wasn't just a hospital, it was a statement. Its gleaming glass and steel facade rose into the skyline like a monument to modern medicine and immense wealth. Valets in crisp grey uniforms moved with silent efficiency accustomed to the city's most powerful figures. Christopher Davies didn't wait for one. He brought the Aston Martin to a screeching halt directly in front of the main entrance, leaving the engine running as he vaulted out. "Help, I need a doctor. Now!" He barked, his voice accustomed to instant obedience. He rounded the car to help Brooke, who managed a convincingly feeble moan as she leaned heavily against him. She was an actress by ambition, and today she was giving the performance of a lifetime. A slight dizzy spell after a champagne brunch had been masterfully spun into a potential medical crisis that required Christopher's immediate undivided attention. "My stomach," she whispered, her hand splayed dramatically below her ribs. "It's a sharp pain, Chris. It came out of nowhere." Christopher's face was a mask of concern, but his mind was on logistics. "Get in, get the best doctor, throw some money around, and get out." This was an inconvenient but manageable interruption. His phone buzzed again. Jessica. He silenced it with a flick of his thumb. He'd call her back later and tell her he was stuck in a last-minute board meeting. It was his go-to excuse, and she never questioned it. Why would she? She was sweet, trusting, simple Jessica. The perfect, stable backdrop for his dynamic life. A team of orderlies approached with a wheelchair, their professionalism a stark contrast to Christopher's manufactured panic. "We need a private suite, the best one you have, and I want to see the chief of medicine immediately," Christopher demanded, already pulling out his platinum credit card as if it were a scepter. The lead orderly, a man with a calm, weathered face, simply nodded. "We'll take care of the patient, sir. Please see the admissions desk inside for the necessary arrangements." Christopher scoffed. Arrangements were for other people. "Just bill whatever it is to this card. Davies. Christopher Davies, CEO of Kronos Innovations. The name should be sufficient." He expected a flicker of recognition, a change in posture, the deference he was so used to. He got none. The orderly focused entirely on settling Brooke into the wheelchair, his movements gentle and practiced. Brooke, for her part, offered a weak smile to Christopher, her eyes fluttering closed. As they wheeled her inside, Christopher followed, his expensive Italian shoes clicking impatiently on the polished marble floor. The lobby was less like a hospital and more like a five-star hotel. A cascading waterfall flowed down a granite wall, the sound a soothing murmur. Abstract art, the kind that cost more than a suburban house, adorned the walls. He strode to the main reception desk, a sweeping curve of polished mahogany. "I'm Christopher Davies," he announced to the receptionist, a poised woman with a headset. "The patient is Brooke Summers. I've requested the chief of medicine and a VIP suite. Please expedite this." The receptionist typed something into her computer, her expression unreadable. "One moment, sir." Christopher tapped his fingers on the desk, his patience wearing thin. He wasn't used to waiting. He wasn't used to being treated like just another person. He looked around, noting the discreet brass plaque near the entrance, the Hartman Medical Center. A common name, he mused. Probably some long-dead philanthropist. It meant nothing to him. His phone buzzed a third time. A text message from Jessica. "Hey, just calling to check in. Hope the meeting is going well. The baby's kicking like a soccer player today. Call me when you can. Love you." A pang of something he refused to identify as guilt pricked at him. He quickly suppressed it. Jessica was fine. She was always fine. She was at home, nesting, doing whatever pregnant women did. She was safe. Brooke, however, needed him. It was a simple, self-serving justification, but it was enough. "Sir," the receptionist said, her voice pulling him back. "Dr. Peterson will be down to speak with you shortly. If you'd like to take a seat." "I don't want to take a seat." He snapped his voice a low growl. "I want a doctor for my friend. Is that so difficult to understand? Or do I need to speak to the person who runs this place and explain how customer service works?" The receptionist remained unnervingly calm. "Dr. Peterson is the chief of medicine, sir. She is the person you requested." Before Christopher could retort, a woman in a crisp white coat approached. She was in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and grey-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her name tag read, "Dr. Ann Peterson, Chief of Medicine." "Miss Davies," she said, her voice level and devoid of the awe he expected. "I'm Dr. Peterson. I was told you had some concerns." "Concerns?" Christopher laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "My friend is in severe pain, and we're being held up by bureaucracy. I want her in a room, diagnosed and treated. Now. I'm prepared to pay any price." Dr. Peterson's gaze was steady. "All our patients are treated with the utmost urgency and care, Mr. Davies. Ms. Summers has been taken to an examination room in our emergency wing. A top diagnostician is with her now. We don't expedite care based on credit limits. We do it based on medical need." The polite professional condescension was infuriating. It was a language Christopher wasn't used to hearing. He felt his control, the very foundation of his world, slipping. "Perhaps you don't understand," he said, leaning closer, lowering his voice to an intimidating hiss. "I am a very influential man. A hospital like this relies on donors, on patrons. It would be a shame if a facility with such a fine reputation were to suddenly find itself with a very powerful, very vocal critic." Dr. Peterson didn't even blink. Instead, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of her lips. It was the smile of someone who held all the cards and knew it. "Mr. Davies," she said, her voice dropping to a confidential, almost pitying tone. "You seem to be under a number of misapprehensions, but don't worry. I think they are all about to be cleared up." From down the hall, the quiet, rhythmic squeak of orthopedic shoes grew louder. A new figure was approaching. Christopher turned, expecting another doctor or an administrator he could finally intimidate. But the face he saw sent a jolt of ice-cold dread through his entire body. It was Jessica, his pregnant wife. And she wasn't smiling. Jessica moved with a quiet grace that Christopher had always mistaken for meekness. Her pregnancy had softened her features, but today her blue eyes, usually so warm, were as hard and cold as glacial ice. She wasn't looking at him. Her gaze was fixed on Dr. Peterson. "Anne," Jessica said, her voice calm and clear, cutting through the sterile hum of the lobby. "Is there a problem here?" Christopher's mind raced, trying to compute this impossible scenario. What was Jessica doing here? A checkup, a false alarm with the baby. It had to be a coincidence, a terrible, universe-shattering coincidence. "No problem at all, Jessica," Dr. Peterson replied, her tone shifting from professional coolness to one of genuine warmth and respect. "Mr. Davies was just expressing his concerns about our hospital's procedures." Jessica's eyes finally settled on Christopher. The look in them was not one of surprise or hurt, not yet. It was a look of profound, weary disappointment. It was the look of someone whose worst suspicions had just been confirmed. "My husband," Jessica said, the words perfectly articulated, "can be very enthusiastic, especially when he's worried about a friend." The slight pause before the word friend was a scalpel expertly wielded. Christopher felt sweat prickle on his neck. He had to take control of this narrative, and fast. "Jess, what are you doing here? I was just—" "A colleague from work, Brooke Summers." She suddenly collapsed. "I had to rush her here. I was about to call you." He stammered the lie, tasting like ash in his mouth. Jessica's expression didn't change. "You didn't have to call me Christopher. I was already here. I had my 32-week scan this afternoon. You would have known that if you'd read the text I sent you this morning." The text? He'd glanced at it, registered something about an appointment, and immediately dismissed it as non-urgent. His board meeting had seemed more important. "The meeting ran long, sweetheart. It was unavoidable," he said, trying to inject a note of apologetic sincerity into his voice. He reached for her arm, a gesture of ownership and control. She took a small step back, avoiding his touch. The rejection was subtle, but in the silent, charged atmosphere of the lobby, it felt like a gunshot. "Dr. Peterson," Jessica said, turning back to the chief of medicine, "my husband was demanding a private suite and your personal attention for his colleague. Please make sure Ms. Summers receives the standard excellent level of care we provide to all our patients. No special treatment is necessary or warranted." Dr. Peterson nodded. "Of course, Jessica." She then looked at Christopher. "If you'll excuse me, I have other patients to attend to. Your friend is in good hands." With a final meaningful look at Jessica, she turned and walked away. The lobby suddenly felt vast and empty. The receptionist was studiously ignoring them. The waterfall seemed to mock him with its serene indifference. Christopher was left alone with his wife, and for the first time in their marriage, he felt utterly powerless. "Jess, let me explain." He began, his voice dropping. "Explain what?" she asked, her tone dangerously quiet. "Explain why your colleague is a 25-year-old aspiring model who you've been having lunches with for the past 6 months. Lunches that, according to your credit card statements, have been happening at boutique hotels. Or should we talk about the jewelry from Cartier that you bought last month? A corporate gift, I believe you called it." Christopher was stunned into silence. He had been so arrogant, so sure of his own cleverness, so dismissive of her intelligence. He saw her as the gentle, unassuming wife who managed their home and social calendar. He never imagined she was paying attention. He never imagined she was capable of this cold, analytical dissection of his deceit. How did you know?" he whispered. A humorless smile touched Jessica's lips. "You're not a careful man, Christopher. You're a careless one. You think because I don't run a tech company that I don't understand how the world works. That was your first mistake." She gestured vaguely at the opulent surroundings. "My family has been in the business of managing complex systems for a very long time." The way she said it sent a chill down his spine. Her family. The Hartmans. He'd met her parents a few times before they passed away. He remembered them as quiet old money types. Her father, Robert Hartman, had been a retired investor who, in Christopher's opinion, lacked any real killer instinct. Her mother had been a society woman, dedicated to charity. He had patronized them, seeing them as relics of a bygone era. He saw their wealth as old and stagnant, nothing like the dynamic, disruptive fortune he was building. He looked from Jessica's face to the brass plaque on the wall, the Hartman Medical Center. The name wasn't a coincidence. His mind was struggling to connect the dots. The name on the building, the deference Dr. Peterson showed Jessica, the way she had spoken of her family. It was like watching a puzzle assemble itself, and the final picture was one he couldn't comprehend. "Hartman," he said aloud, the name feeling foreign and heavy on his tongue. "This place, it's named after my father," Jessica finished for him, her voice flat. "He founded it 30 years ago. He and my grandfather built this entire medical foundation from the ground up." The foundation of Christopher's world didn't just crack, it shattered. He had married Jessica Hartman, seeing her as a pretty well-bred accessory to his life. He knew she had a trust fund, a comfortable inheritance he'd always mentally categorized as her little nest egg. He had no idea. He had been living in a palace thinking it was a cottage, and had never once bothered to look up at the ceiling. Your family owns this hospital," he stammered, the question sounding absurd even to his own ears. Jessica's gaze hardened. "Christopher, my family doesn't just own the hospital. We own the building, the land it's on, the pharmaceutical research lab in the West Wing, the medical supply company that stocks it, and the charitable foundation that oversees it all." She paused, letting the weight of her words land with the force of a physical blow. "I don't just have a nest egg. I am the chairman of the board. And you," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that was more terrifying than any scream, "just brought your mistress to my hospital." The words hung in the air, sucking all the oxygen from Christopher's lungs. Chairman of the board. The title seemed alien, impossible when applied to his wife. Jessica was the woman who organized dinner parties, who reminded him to call his mother, who was carrying his child. She was not a titan of industry. She couldn't be. His entire perception of their life together tilted on its axis. The quiet dinners with her parents, which he had endured with smug condescension, suddenly replayed in his mind. He remembered her father, Robert, speaking softly about endowment management and biotech portfolios. Christopher had dismissed it as the ramblings of a hobbyist. He now realized he had been a child, listening to giants discuss the creation of worlds. That's not possible," he managed to say, the denial a reflex. You handled charity balls, not board meetings. And you thought those charity balls, which raise 8 figures in a single night, just organize themselves? Jessica countered, her voice sharp. "You saw what you wanted to see, Chris. A docile domestic wife who wouldn't ask too many questions. It was a convenient fantasy for you, and I allowed you to have it. That was my mistake." He stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time. The simple, elegant dress she wore probably cost more than his suit. The quiet confidence he'd mistaken for passivity was actually the profound stillness of immense power. She hadn't needed his flashy world of venture capital and hostile takeovers. She had been living in a world of her own, one so far above his, he hadn't even been able to perceive it. "Why?" he asked the question, laced with a pathetic bewilderment. "Why wouldn't you tell me the extent of it?" "Tell you?" she asked, a genuine, bitter laugh escaping her lips. "I tried in the beginning. Do you remember when I tried to talk to you about the Hartman Foundation's new investment in robotic surgery? You patted my hand and said, 'That's nice, honey,' before spending the next hour boasting about a new app your company had acquired. You never asked a single follow-up question. You never showed a shred of genuine interest in my life, my family, or my legacy. You only ever saw me as a reflection of yourself." Every word was a nail being hammered into the coffin of his arrogance. He had been so blind, so wrapped up in his own self-importance. He thought he was the sun, and she was a minor planet caught in his orbit. The reality was that he had been a small moon orbiting a star he didn't even know was there. His phone buzzed. He instinctively glanced down. It was a notification from his bank. He ignored it. "So this is it," he said, trying to find some footing, some way to regain control. "You bring me to your kingdom to humiliate me." "Don't flatter yourself, Christopher. My day does not revolve around you," she said coldly. "As I told you, I had a doctor's appointment. You chose to bring your affair to my front door. This humiliation is entirely of your own making." As if on cue, a large, imposing man in a dark suit materialized beside them. He was built like a former linebacker, with a calm, watchful presence. He nodded respectfully at Jessica. "Mr. Henderson," she greeted him. "Is there an update? Ms. Summers has been diagnosed with mild dehydration and acute anxiety," the man Henderson reported in a low, rumbling voice. "Dr. Matthews has recommended she be given IV fluids and discharged within the hour." Mild dehydration. The entire dramatic life-or-death emergency that had ripped his afternoon apart was nothing more than a case of a young woman needing a glass of water. The absurdity of it all was a fresh wave of humiliation. "And her bill?" Jessica asked. "As per your instructions, it will be sent to Mr. Davies's personal account, not his corporate one," Henderson confirmed. Jessica nodded. "Thank you, Robert. Could you please escort my husband to the cafeteria? I believe he and I have a few more things to discuss, and I'd prefer a more private setting." "Of course, Mrs. Davies." Henderson turned his impassive gaze on Christopher. "Sir, if you'll come with me." It wasn't a request. Christopher looked from the mountain of a man to his wife. The power dynamic had shifted so completely it gave him vertigo. He was no longer a CEO in control. He was a misbehaving child being sent to the principal's office. He had no choice but to follow. The hospital cafeteria was as elegant as the rest of the building, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a manicured garden. But Jessica didn't lead him to one of the comfortable booths. She guided him to a stark, functional table in a secluded corner under the unflattering glare of a fluorescent light. Henderson stood at a discreet but unmissable distance. Jessica sat down, placing her hands on her swollen belly in a protective gesture. She slid a sleek, dark blue folder across the table. "I had hoped to have this conversation under different circumstances," she began, her voice devoid of its earlier anger, replaced now by a chilling, businesslike tone. "I was hoping we could discuss this at home after the baby was born, but you've forced my hand." Christopher stared at the folder. He didn't want to open it. He knew that whatever was inside would be the final definitive end of the life he knew. "Jess, please." He tried his voice hoarse. "We can fix this. I made a mistake. A horrible, stupid mistake. But we have a baby coming. Our family. Our family." She cut him off, her voice dangerously soft. "The family you were betraying while I was at home carrying your son. The family you neglected so you could play benefactor to a woman suffering from anxiety." She pushed the folder closer to him. "Open it, Christopher." With trembling hands, he opened the folder. The first page was a document from a forensic accounting firm. It was a detailed analysis of the finances of Kronos Innovations, his company. His pride and joy. His eyes scanned the columns of numbers, the highlighted transactions, the damning summaries. He felt the blood drain from his face. This wasn't just about his affair. This was about everything. The seed money for Kronos. Jessica said, her voice a clinical narration of his doom. "You told me you secured it from a consortium of angel investors in Silicon Valley. A brilliant pitch, you said. They were begging to get in on the ground floor." He looked up at her, his heart pounding in his chest. "But there were no angel investors, were there, Chris?" She continued. "The initial $5 million, the money that started it all, was funneled from one of my family's legacy trust accounts, an account you gained access to when we consolidated our finances after our wedding, an account you must have thought was just some forgotten pot of money." He couldn't speak. She knew. She knew his darkest, most foundational secret. He wasn't a self-made man. He was a thief. "You didn't build an empire, Christopher," she said, her voice sealing his fate. "You stole the foundation of one and built a shack on it, and the rent is now due." The sterile air of the cafeteria felt thick, heavy, and suffocating. Christopher stared at the forensic accounting report, but the numbers blurred into meaningless symbols. The only thing he could see clearly was the abyss that had opened up beneath him. The affair was a symptom. This was the disease. His entire success story, the narrative he had built his identity around, was a fraud. How could you do this?" He whispered the question ludicrously aimed at her, as if she were the perpetrator. "Spying on me. Hiring accountants. You call it spying. I call it due diligence." Jessica retorted, her composure absolute. "Did you really think I wouldn't keep an eye on the family trusts my father taught me to read a balance sheet before I learned to ride a bicycle? The discrepancies started small about 18 months ago. A few $100,000 here, a $500,000 there. You were clever routing it through shell corporations. You probably thought it was an insignificant amount, lost in the noise of multi-billion-dollar portfolios." She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. "But it was a pattern, and it was my money. So I hired the best forensic accountants in the country. Not to spy on my husband, but to protect my family's assets from a potential threat. It turns out the threat was sleeping in my bed." He felt a desperate primal urge to defend himself, to twist the narrative. "I was going to pay it back. With interest. The company is a huge success. The valuation is through the roof. It was an investment. I used that money to build something incredible for us. For us." Jessica's laugh was sharp and brittle. "Was the penthouse apartment you leased on the other side of town for us? Was the Porsche you bought Brooke for her birthday for us? Was this entire secret life you built on my family's money? For us." She gestured to the folder. "It's all in there, Christopher. Every wire transfer, every gift, every hotel bill. They didn't just find the embezzlement from the trust. They found how you used it. You've been living a lie, and I've been funding it." Suddenly, the phone he'd placed on the table buzzed again, this time with a series of frantic notifications. He glanced down. Emails from his chief financial officer. Text messages from his bank. Urgent corporate accounts frozen. Credit card transaction denied. Amount $2,500. Merchant Cartier. Notice. Access to Kronos. Innovations. Primary operating accounts has been suspended, pending an internal investigation. He looked up at Jessica, utter disbelief warring with dawning horror. "What did you do?" "I protected my assets," she said simply. The forensic report was presented to the board of the Hartman Foundation this morning. Given that the foundation holds a significant and until now silent partnership in Kronos Innovations, a little detail you must have missed in the fine print of the initial funding you stole, they voted to launch an immediate investigation into financial mismanagement. As the majority stakeholder, I had the authority to freeze the accounts to prevent further misappropriation of funds. Your CFO was notified 10 minutes ago. He had been checkmated in a game he never even knew he was playing. While he was racing his mistress to the hospital, his empire was being dismantled brick by the woman he had so fatally underestimated. "You can't do that," he said the words weak and powerless. "It's my company." "Is it?" she countered. "Is a house built with stolen materials truly owned by the thief? According to my lawyers, it's a very grey area. And Christopher," she added, her voice dropping, "my lawyers are much, much better than yours." As if summoned, another man approached the table. He was sharp and impeccably dressed, carrying a slim leather briefcase. This was David Chen, the Hartman family's lead counsel, a man known in legal circles as a shark who never lost. "Jessica," David said with a respectful nod, before turning his cool, assessing gaze on Christopher. "Mr. Davies." "David, thank you for coming," Jessica said. "I believe you have some documents for my husband." David Chen placed his briefcase on the table and opened it with 2 precise clicks. He pulled out a thick sheaf of papers and placed it squarely in front of Christopher on top of the accounting report. "Mr. Davies." The lawyer began, his tone formal and devoid of any emotion. "These are divorce papers. They cite infidelity and financial fraud as the primary grounds. All shared assets which, upon review, appear to have been purchased with funds originating from Mrs. Davies's inheritance or trusts have been frozen by court order. This includes your homes, your vehicles, and your personal investment portfolios." He slid another document forward. "This is a restraining order. You are to remain at least 500 feet away from Mrs. Davies and all her properties, including your marital home, effective immediately." Christopher's world narrowed to the stack of paper in front of him. Divorce, frozen assets, restraining order. Each word was a nail. "The marital home. You're kicking me out of my own house," he choked out. "The house was purchased by the Hartman Trust as a wedding gift for me, Christopher. Your name was never on the deed. You were a guest," Jessica said softly. "The party is over." He felt a surge of useless rage. "You'll regret this, Jessica. I'll fight you. I'll take you for everything you've got. I'll tell the world what you are." David Chen spoke before Jessica could. "I wouldn't advise that, Mr. Davies. Any attempt to slander Mrs. Davies would be met with a defamation lawsuit of a magnitude you can no longer afford to fight. Furthermore, we have not yet filed the criminal complaint for embezzlement. My client has been gracious enough to hold off on that for now. For the sake of her unborn child, she would prefer to handle this civilly. But if you choose to make this difficult—" He paused, letting the threat hang in the air. "Her graciousness has its limits, and a federal prosecutor would be very interested in this forensic report. Prison. The word wasn't spoken, but it echoed in the space between them. Christopher looked at Jessica, the mother of his child, and saw a stranger. A woman with the power to not only ruin him, but to utterly erase him. His bravado crumbled, replaced by a desperate, pathetic plea. "Jess, don't do this. Think of the baby." "I am thinking of him," she replied, her voice finally cracking with a sliver of raw emotion. "I am ensuring he is born into a life of honesty and integrity. I am protecting him from a father who is a liar, a cheat, and a thief. He will know his grandfather's legacy, not his father's shame." She stood up, her movement slow and deliberate. "Robert will show you out," she said, gesturing to Mr. Henderson, who had remained a silent statue nearby. "Your personal effects from the house will be sent to an address of your lawyer's choosing. Do not try to contact me again. All communication will go through David." She turned and walked away without a backward glance, leaving Christopher sitting alone at the table with the ruins of his life laid out on paper. He was no longer Christopher Davies, the tech mogul. He was just a man in a hospital cafeteria, stripped of everything. Realizing he had not only lost a fortune, but he had lost a queen he never even knew he had. The walk out of the Hartman Medical Center was the longest walk of Christopher's life. Mr. Henderson shadowed him, a silent, immovable presence that ensured there would be no scenes, no outbursts. People in the lobby, the same people who would have once vied for his attention, now glanced at him with curiosity, their eyes lingering on his pale face and the formidable man escorting him. He was no longer a VIP. He was a problem being managed. When he reached the entrance, his Aston Martin was gone from its imperious spot in the fire lane. A valet, a different one from before, approached him, holding a single key. "Your vehicle has been moved to the long-term parking garage level P4, sir," the young man said politely. "The charges have been handled. Just like everything else." He snatched the key and stalked towards the parking garage, the humiliation burning in his gut. Inside the concrete structure, he found his car parked neatly between the lines, looking suddenly less like a symbol of power and more like a gaudy, useless toy. He slumped into the driver's seat, the smell of expensive leather now nauseating. He tried his phone. He called his CFO, Mark. It went straight to voicemail. He called the head of his legal department. Voicemail. He called his personal banker. A polite but firm assistant informed him that all his accounts were under a temporary hold, and she couldn't provide any more information. The wall was absolute. Jessica had built it, and it was impenetrable. He sat in the silence of his car for what felt like an hour, his mind a maelstrom of rage and disbelief. He had been so thoroughly and systematically dismantled. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment act of revenge. This was a long-planned, meticulously executed strategy. Jessica, his quiet, unassuming wife, had been watching him gathering evidence and laying the groundwork for his destruction for months. The affair hadn't been the cause. It had merely been the trigger. The thought sent a fresh wave of cold dread through him. She hadn't just reacted to his infidelity. She had been preparing for his betrayal on a fundamental level long before Brooke was ever in the picture. She had known what he was. His thoughts turned to Brooke. What was he going to do about her? He had brought her here promising to take care of her. Now he couldn't even afford to pay for her IV drip. He pulled up her contact, his thumb hovering over the call button. What would he even say? "Sorry, darling, the billionaire you've been seeing is a fraud whose wife just cut him off completely. Good luck with the dehydration." Before he could decide, a call came through. It was Brooke. "Chris, where are you?" Her voice was shaky, but the dramatic weakness was gone, replaced by an edge of anxiety. "They're discharging me." They handed me a bill. An actual bill. Can you believe it? They said I had to sort it out with admissions, and some huge guy in a suit told me I needed to leave the premises immediately. What is going on? Christopher closed his eyes. The small, manageable drama he had walked in with had been swallowed by a cataclysm. "I'm in the parking garage, Brooke. There's been a complication," he said, his voice flat. "A complication? What does that mean? Is this about that woman I saw you with? The pregnant one? Was that your wife?" The questions came in a rush, laced with accusation. She was no longer the damsel in distress. She was a co-conspirator whose getaway driver had just been arrested. "Yes, that was my wife." He admitted the words, feeling like gravel in his throat. "And what happened? Did she make a scene? Are you okay?" "She didn't make a scene, Brooke. She made a phone call," he said bitterly. "It turns out she owns the hospital and the bank that holds my company's accounts. And as of about an hour ago, she owns my entire life." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. He could almost hear the frantic calculations happening in her head as she processed this new world-altering information. What, you're kidding, right? This is some kind of sick joke." "I wish it were," he said, the exhaustion hitting him like a physical weight. "My accounts are frozen. The company is in lockdown. I've been served with divorce papers. I'm locked out of my own house." "Your house? But what about my things?" She asked the question so purely self-interested, it was almost comical. "I left my new Dior handbag in the foyer." Christopher almost laughed. A handbag. He was facing financial ruin, public disgrace, and possible jail time, and she was worried about a handbag. In that moment, he saw Brooke for exactly what she was, a beautiful, shallow opportunist who had attached herself to his wealth, just as Jessica had said. "I don't think you'll be getting it back, Brooke," he said wearily. "Listen, I can't do this right now. I have to figure things out." "Figure things out? What about me, Chris?" Her voice rose, becoming shrill. "You made me promises. You said you were leaving her. You said you were going to take care of me. Promises I can no longer keep." He snapped, his patience gone. "The man you thought I was doesn't exist anymore. You're on your own." He hung up the phone before she could reply, tossing it onto the passenger seat. The silence that followed was absolute. He had no one to call, no one to help him. His business partners would scatter the moment the news of the fraud investigation broke. His friends were social climbers who would drop him the second his name was tainted. He was an island, and the tide was coming in. He finally started the car, the powerful engine roaring to life. But he had nowhere to go. He couldn't go home. He couldn't go to his office. He couldn't even check into a hotel, not with his credit cards frozen. He drove aimlessly out of the garage and into the late afternoon traffic. The city, his city, a place he had once commanded from penthouse boardrooms and exclusive clubs, now felt alien and hostile. Every gleaming skyscraper seemed to mock him, a testament to a world he was no longer a part of. He was a ghost haunting the streets of his former life. News alerts began to pop up on his car's display screen. Kronos Innovations halts trading pending internal review. CEO Christopher Davies under investigation for financial misconduct. The ripple effect was becoming a tidal wave. Jessica hadn't just exposed him. She had launched a surgical strike designed for maximum immediate impact. The business world moved at the speed of information, and his reputation was already being shredded. He pulled over to the side of a busy street, overwhelmed. He thought back to that morning. He had woken up a king. He had put on a $1,000 suit, drunk his custom-blended coffee, and looked at his reflection, seeing a master of the universe. Now he was nothing. A man with a fancy car he probably wouldn't be able to afford gas for by next week. It was a fall so swift, so total, that his mind could barely grasp it. And the architect of it all was the one person he had never, not for a single second, considered a threat. The quiet woman carrying his child. Brooke Summers stood outside the imposing glass doors of the Heartman Medical Center, her thin silk blouse offering little protection against the sudden chill of the evening breeze. The bill from the emergency room was clutched in her hand, a crisp, mocking piece of paper detailing the exorbitant cost of IV fluids and a doctor's 5-minute consultation. Her phone was silent. Christopher hadn't answered her last 3 frantic calls. Her carefully constructed world, built on promises whispered over champagne and backed by the solid weight of Christopher's black card, was dissolving like sugar in the rain. She had seen herself as the heroine of a romance novel, the beautiful young woman who captures the heart of a powerful, trapped man and helps him escape his dreary, passionless marriage. She had imagined a future of sun-drenched villas, front-row seats at Fashion Week, and the envious glances of her peers. The woman she had seen in the lobby, Jessica, had shattered that fantasy. There was nothing dreary or passionless about her. Brooke had seen the steel in her eyes, the effortless authority in her posture. That wasn't the neglected wife from Christopher's stories. That was a queen surveying her domain. And Brooke, in her flimsy designer dress and feigned illness, had been nothing more than a court jester making a fool of herself. A taxi pulled up to the curb. She got in, giving the driver the address to the downtown penthouse Christopher had leased for their trysts. It was her only sanctuary, the only place filled with things he had bought her. Perhaps he would go there. Perhaps this was all a terrible, elaborate misunderstanding. But when the taxi arrived, her keycard flashed red. Access denied. She tried again. A cold knot of panic tightened in her stomach. She called the building's concierge, a man who had always greeted her with a fawning smile. "I'm sorry, Ms. Summers," he said, his voice now clipped and professional. "We received a notification from the leaseholder this afternoon. Your access has been revoked effective immediately." "But my things are up there," she protested, her voice rising. "My clothes, my jewelry. Arrangements will be made to have your personal belongings packed and sent to you. We will need a forwarding address," he said coolly. And then the line went dead. She was locked out, stripped of her access as cleanly and efficiently as Christopher had been. This wasn't just Jessica's anger. This was a scorched earth campaign. Defeated Brooke slumped against the cold marble wall of the building's exterior. The life she had been living for the past 6 months was an illusion. She hadn't been Christopher's partner. She had been a line item on an expense report, a luxury he had purchased with stolen funds. And now that the funds were gone, so was she. She thought about the other women in her circle, the ones who dated wealthy, powerful men. They had always warned her. "Get it in writing," they'd say. "Make sure you have your own account." She had laughed at them, convinced that her connection with Chris was different. It was real. He loved her. He was just waiting for the right time to leave his wife. How naive she had been. She had been so captivated by the performance of wealth and power that she never bothered to look behind the curtain. She had taken his stories about his simple wife at face value because it fit the narrative she wanted. She had been a willing audience for his lies. Her phone buzzed. For a heart-stopping moment, she thought it was Chris. But it was a notification from a gossip blog, the kind she followed religiously. The headline was a dagger. Tech CEO Christopher Davies' empire crumbles amidst allegations of massive fraud. Wife philanthropist Jessica Hartman files for divorce. The story was already out. It was brief but brutal. It mentioned Kronos Innovations' frozen accounts, the sudden investigation, and the divorce filing. It painted Christopher as a charlatan, and Jessica as a quiet powerhouse, the unsuspecting heiress to the Hartman fortune who had finally uncovered her husband's deceit. Brooke's name wasn't mentioned, but she knew it was only a matter of time. She was the loose thread in the story, the other woman. The paparazzi would find her. Her face would be splashed across tabloids, not as a rising star, but as a home-wrecking gold digger. The scandal would cling to her like tar poisoning any chance she had of a legitimate acting career. She hadn't just lost a benefactor. She had lost her future. A wave of bitter resentment washed over her. Resentment towards Christopher for his lies and his weakness. Resentment towards Jessica for her power and her perfectly executed revenge. But underneath it all, a small, hard kernel of resentment was reserved for herself. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. Or in this case, she had been thrown out of it and locked out of the building. With no other options, she called the one person she knew she could always count on, the person she had been avoiding for months, because her life had seemed too small and too ordinary. Her sister. "Hey, Katie," she said, trying to keep her voice from breaking, when her sister answered. "Yeah, it's me. Listen, I know it's last minute, but can I come and stay with you for a few days? It's a long story." As she hailed another taxi this time to take her to a modest apartment in the suburbs, Brooke Summers finally understood. In the high-stakes game between Christopher and Jessica, she had never been a player. She was just part of the collateral damage. For the next 48 hours, Christopher Davies existed in a state of suspended animation. He found a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city that still accepted cash, a relic of a bygone era. The room smelled of stale smoke and despair. He, a man who had once complained if his hotel suite didn't have a view of the park, now stared at a peeling wallpaper landscape of a faded beach. His phone was a relentless torrent of bad news. His story was the lead on every financial news network. Pundits who had once lauded him as a visionary now picked apart his career, recasting him as a reckless gambler and a fraud. Former colleagues and so-called friends released statements distancing themselves from him and Kronos Innovations. He was radioactive. He finally managed to get a lawyer on the phone, a harried public defender his old legal team had recommended in a terse 2-sentence email. The man, an overworked but decent lawyer named Ben Carter, laid out the grim reality. "The evidence the Hartman legal team has is overwhelming, Mr. Davies." Ben said, his voice tinny over the phone. "The paper trail for the embezzlement is pristine. They have you dead to rights on the civil fraud. Your only saving grace right now is that Mrs. Davies hasn't pressed criminal charges. My advice, don't provoke her. So I just roll over. Let her take everything," Christopher demanded, pacing the threadbare carpet of his motel room. "Frankly, sir, there's nothing left to take. It was never yours to begin with," Ben stated bluntly. "The company was built with her money. The house is hers. The cars were purchased from accounts funded by her trust. We can fight to get you some personal effects, maybe a severance from the company you technically founded, but it will be pennies on the dollar. They are in a position of absolute strength. Absolute strength. The phrase echoed in his mind. He thought of Jessica, of her calm, unyielding face in the cafeteria. He had mistaken her gentleness for weakness, her kindness for naivete. He now understood that her gentleness was a choice, a luxury afforded to her by a foundation of unshakable power. He had been the weak one all along, propped up by her resources, blinded by his own ego. On the third day, a courier delivered a box to his motel room. It contained a few of his old suits, some books, and a small framed photo from the early days of their marriage. In the photo, he and Jessica were laughing on a beach, young and full of hope. He looked at the man in the picture, the man with the genuine smile, and felt like he was looking at a complete stranger. When had he lost that person? When had the ambition curdled into greed, the confidence into arrogance? Tucked inside the box was a simple, handwritten note on plain stationery. Christopher, this is the last time you will hear from me directly. Enclosed are the final divorce papers. Sign them. If you sign them without a fight, the criminal charges will not be pursued. You will be left with the small personal savings account you had before we were married, which amounts to roughly $70,000. That is all. Consider it a final act of mercy, not for you, but for the child who will one day have to know you are his father. Do not try to see the baby after he is born. David will arrange supervised visitation in a neutral location when and if I deem it appropriate. This is not negotiable. Jessica. $70,000. To the man he had been a week ago, it was a bar tab. Now it was his entire world. The note was not cruel. It was clinical. It was the final closing of a deal, the termination of a bad investment. She had excised him from her life with the precision of a surgeon. He sat on the lumpy bed, the divorce papers in his hand, and he finally, truly understood. This wasn't about the affair. The affair was just the final ugly symptom of his betrayal. He had betrayed her trust, her family's legacy, and the very foundation of their marriage. He had taken her quiet, steadfast love and used it as a cover for his own insecurities and greed. There was no fight left in him. The rage was gone, replaced by a hollow, aching emptiness. He had built his life into a magnificent tower, but he had done it on sand. And the tide had come in. He picked up the cheap pen from the motel desk, its plastic casing feeling flimsy and foreign in his hand. He flattened the papers on the stained nightstand, and with a trembling hand signed his name. He signed away his company, his home, his fortune, and his family. He signed away Christopher Davies, the tech mogul. When he was done, all that was left was Chris. A man in a cheap motel room with $70,000 and a lifetime of regret stretching out before him. The stripping of the king was complete. He was left with nothing but himself, and it was a self he no longer recognized. 6 months later, Jessica Hartman stood at her office window, her infant son Robert sleeping peacefully in a bassinet nearby. The world outside was painted in the crisp colors of autumn, a season of change that mirrored her own. She was no longer the wife of a CEO. She was the formidable chairman of the Hartman Foundation, a leader in her own right. The scandal had settled. Kronos Innovations. The hollow monument to Christopher's ego was absorbed and rebranded. As Hartman Future Technologies, it was now a powerful arm of the foundation, its purpose redirected from flashy apps to meaningful medical innovation. The empire built on a lie had been remade into a legacy of substance. News of Christopher was a whisper. He had taken the pittance she had left him and disappeared into a life of anonymity in a small Midwestern town. He signed the divorce papers without a fight, and out of shame or cowardice, had not once asked to see his son. He was a ghost erased from the life he had tried to corrupt. Dr. Ann Peterson knocked gently before entering, her eyes warm. "The new pediatric wing is officially opening next week," she said with a smile. "The dedication plaque looks wonderful." Jessica looked from her friend to her son, a profound sense of peace settling over her. She had faced betrayal and had not just endured. She had built something better from the ruins. She had protected her family, her child, and her legacy. The storm was over, and in the quiet aftermath, Jessica Hartman, mother and leader, was finally truly home. What a story of deceit, hidden power, and ultimate justice. Jessica's journey shows us that true strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the quiet, observant force that changes the world. Christopher's spectacular downfall is a powerful reminder that a life built on lies is a house of cards ready to collapse at the slightest breeze. He didn't just lose his money, he lost the one person who was his greatest asset, and he never even knew it. What do you think about Jessica's actions? Was her response perfectly calculated justice, or was it a cold, brutal revenge? Could Christopher ever redeem himself? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of hidden strength and shocking revelations, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who loves a good story. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss our next real-life drama. Thank you for listening.